Chapter 1. The Christmas exclusion. The scent of pine and cinnamon hung in the air, mingling with the aroma of roasted turkey that promised to be the centerpiece of our Christmas dinner. Fairy lights twinkled on the tree, reflecting in the joyful eyes of the children who ran through the living room, oblivious to the silent tension that hung over the adults. For me, Clara, Christmas had always been more than a date on the calendar. It was a sacred ritual of family unity, a tradition I cultivated with fervor since becoming the informal matriarch after my parents' passing. But this year, something would be different. This year, Sophia's chair would be empty. The decision was not made lightly, but it was firm. Years of accumulated grievances, of disappointments that had turned into deep scars, led me to this point. Sophia, my younger sister, had always been the free butterfly, the one who followed her own paths, often without looking back, without considering the consequences for others. There was a long-broken promise, support denied at a crucial moment in my life, a burden she left me to carry alone. I tried to forgive, tried to forget, but every attempt at reconciliation seemed to hit a wall of her indifference or her inability to acknowledge the depth of the wound she had caused. For me, it was a matter of respect, of justice. And this Christmas, I decided I would no longer be the bridge to a relationship that only brought me pain. "Are you sure, Clara?" my husband, Ricardo, had asked days earlier, with a tone of concern that I ignored. "It's Christmas. She's your sister." "It's precisely because it's Christmas that I need peace, Ricardo," I replied, my voice harder than I intended. "And her presence would only bring me more disturbance. Enough is enough." And so, the invitation never reached Sophia. I avoided her few calls in the days leading up to the party, and my children, aware of my decision and the reasons behind it, also kept their distance. It was an orchestrated silence, a deliberate exclusion. That Christmas night, as the family gathered, Sophia's absence was an elephant in the room for some, a relief for me. My older sister, Lucia, exchanged a look of disapproval with me, but said nothing. She had always been the peacemaker, but even she knew some battles were mine to fight. My children, João and Patricia, tried to maintain normalcy, laughing with their cousins, but I could feel the slight tension in their shoulders. During dinner, I tried to focus on the lively conversations, the children's laughter, the feeling of being surrounded by those who loved me. The turkey was succulent, the wine flowed, and for a few moments, I almost managed to convince myself that the peace I so desired had arrived. A bitter relief, as the synopsis described, invaded me. I had finally taken a stand. I had protected myself. But then, one of my younger nephews, with the cruel innocence of children, asked, "Aunt Clara, isn't Aunt Sophia coming? She always brings those gingerbread cookies I love." An awkward silence fell over the table. The smile I had maintained faltered. Ricardo quickly intervened, changing the subject, and the conversation resumed, but the moment hit me like a cold reminder. Sophia's absence was not invisible. It was a gap, an empty space that, no matter how hard I tried to fill with forced joy, insisted on making itself known. Later, as everyone prepared for the gift exchange, I retreated to the kitchen, seeking a moment of solitude. The window showed snow falling softly, covering the world outside with a white, silent blanket. The relief I felt at the beginning of the night began to give way to a strange sensation. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was more like an echo, an emptiness that the joy of the party couldn't fill. I had excluded Sophia, yes. But in doing so, I had also, in some way, excluded a part of myself, a part of our history, however painful it was. Christmas night, which should have been pure celebration, ended with a tight knot in my chest, a premonition that this decision, however justified it seemed, would have ramifications I could not yet imagine. Sophia's silence was more deafening than I expected. Chapter 2. The emptiness that remained and growing suspicion. The days following Christmas dragged on with a melancholic slowness. The festive lights were put away, the dinner leftovers consumed, and the collective euphoria gave way to routine and, for me, an unexpected emptiness. The initial relief I felt from distancing myself from Sophia had dissipated, replaced by an uncomfortable sensation I couldn't name. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was more like an echo of her absence, a silence that became increasingly deafening. My house, once filled with laughter and conversation, seemed to have absorbed the tension of that night. Ricardo, my husband, watched me with silent concern. He didn't pressure me, but his glances spoke volumes. My children, João and Patricia, were quieter than usual. Patricia, especially, seemed thoughtful. She and Sophia, despite the age difference and the distance I imposed, always had a quiet bond. "Mom, didn't Aunt Sophia call to wish Happy New Year?" Patricia asked one day, as I watered the plants on the balcony. It was a casual question, but it carried an implicit weight. "No, Patricia." "And I didn't call either," I replied, my voice a little drier than I would have liked. I tried to sound indifferent, but the question hit me. "Sophia always called." Even in the years when our relationship was colder, she maintained the ritual of New Year's greetings. Her silence now was different. It wasn't just physical absence, it was the lack of any sign of life. Lucia, my older sister, the peacemaker, called a few days after Christmas. Her voice was laden with contained sadness. "Clara, Sophia isn't answering the phone. I've tried several times. Do you know anything?" My heart skipped a beat. "No, Lucia. I haven't spoken to her. She knows I didn't want her at Christmas." My voice still carried the stubbornness of my decision, but Lucia's concern was palpable. "But this is strange, Clara," Lucia insisted. "Even when you two fought badly, she always gave a sign of life. Sent a message, called someone in the family. It's like she's disappeared." Lucia's words planted a seed of unease in me. Sophia was erratic, yes, but never to the point of completely vanishing off the map, especially after such a charged event as Christmas. I began to remember small things. Sophia's last messages, which I had ignored, seemed a little more disheartened than usual. A vague comment I heard from a distant relative months ago about Sophia going through a difficult time, which I had dismissed as another one of her drama queens. The image of Sophia, alone, without the warmth of family, began to corrode my armor of resentment. I had excluded her to protect myself, to give myself peace. But what if, in doing so, I had pushed her into an even greater abyss? The anger I felt for her, fueled by years of grievances, began to mix with a pang of guilt. I had focused so much on my pain that I hadn't stopped to think about hers. I decided, reluctantly, to try calling Sophia. Once, twice, 3 times. Only voicemail. I tried her work number, but the secretary informed me she was on indefinite leave. That was unusual. Sophia was dedicated to her career, however much I criticized her lack of stability in other aspects of life. One afternoon, while cleaning the house, I found an old photograph. It was me, Lucia, and Sophia, children, hugging, with gap-toothed smiles. The image brought a wave of nostalgia and sharp pain. Behind all our fights, there was a history of sisterhood, of shared childhood, of bonds that, however stretched, still existed. The growing suspicion that Sophia was facing something serious, something that the Christmas exclusion only deepened, became an uncomfortable certainty. I had wished for peace, but found a restlessness that kept me from sleeping. Sophia's silence was no longer a victory, it was a burden. I needed to know what was happening. Stubbornness and pride began to give way to genuine concern, a glimpse of the empathy I had buried under layers of resentment. The bridge was broken, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to try to rebuild it. Chapter 3, The Painful Discovery and the Bridge of Empathy. The restlessness that consumed me since Christmas had transformed into an urgent need to act. Sophia's silence was a mute cry that I, out of pride, had ignored for too long. I could no longer hide behind old grievances. I needed to know. I began my search reluctantly, but with growing determination. I called mutual friends I hadn't spoken to in years, with the excuse of catching up, but with the real intention of fishing for information about Sophia. Most didn't know much, only that she had been missing or acting strange. With each vague answer, the knot in my stomach tightened. It was then that I remembered Ana Lucia, an old college friend of Sophia's, with whom she had lived for a while and who had always been closer to her than I imagined. I hesitated, but the image of Sophia alone, without the warmth of family, propelled me. I dialed the number, my heart pounding. "Ana Lucia? It's Clara, Sophia's sister," I began, feeling embarrassed. "I know it's been a long time, but I'm worried about Sophia. She hasn't been in touch." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Clara, I didn't want to be the one to tell you this." Ana Lucia's voice was soft, but carried immense weight. "Sophia, she's not well. In fact, she's going through a very, very difficult time." My hands trembled. "What happened? Is she sick?" "Not physically, not that I know of," Ana Lucia replied, and then the truth began to unfold, word by word, like a veil being torn away. "She lost her job a few months ago, Clara. It was a restructuring at her company, and she was caught by surprise. And her boyfriend, Marcos, left her soon after. It seems he was using her money, and when she had nothing left, he just disappeared. She's in debt, behind on rent. I tried to help, but she completely shut herself off. She doesn't want to see anyone. She's isolated, barely leaves the house. I saw her about 2 weeks ago, and she was unrecognizable, very downcast." Ana Lucia's words hit me like physical blows. Lost her job. Left by her boyfriend. Debts. Isolated. The free butterfly I criticized so much was trapped in a web of despair, and I, her own sister, had pushed her deeper into solitude at the moment she needed me most. The anger I felt for her, fueled by years of resentment, crumbled in an instant, replaced by an overwhelming wave of guilt and a searing pain in my chest. I sat down, my legs shaky, my breathing heavy. Images of Sophia, always so vibrant, now downcast and alone, flooded my mind. I remembered when we were children, how she followed me everywhere, how I protected her from bullies at school, how she hugged me tight after a nightmare. All the small arguments, the personality differences, the past grievances, everything seemed insignificant in the face of the magnitude of her suffering. Is she alone, Ana Lucia? My voice barely came out. Yes, Clara. Completely. She doesn't answer anyone. I tried to bring her food, but she barely opened the door. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of my own irregular breathing. Christmas, the dinner, the children's laughter, everything seemed like a cruel farce now. While I celebrated, my sister was sinking. I had excluded her, not just from my table, but from my life, at her most vulnerable moment. The guilt was an overwhelming weight, but along with it, a new emotion began to emerge, a deep and urgent empathy. It was no longer about who was right or wrong, about old wounds. It was about a sister who needed help. The image of that old photograph, of us 3 children, came back to my mind. The bridge between us was not just broken, it had been dynamited by me, and Sophia was on the other side, alone in the dark. I needed to do something. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of a rediscovery of the fraternal love I had buried. The stubbornness and pride that had guided me until then dissolved, giving way to a cold determination. I had made a terrible mistake, and now, I would do whatever it took to try to fix it. I didn't know how Sophia would react, if she would forgive me, if there was still time. But I had to try. The journey to rebuild the bridge began there, with the painful truth and the urgency of a heart that, finally, opened to empathy. Chapter 4, The Path to Forgiveness and Redefining Bonds. The discovery of Sophia's situation left me in a state of shock and urgency. Guilt was a heavy burden, but the empathy that had finally blossomed in my heart was even more powerful, driving me to act. There was no time for hesitation. The next day, I informed Ricardo and my children about what had happened to Sophia. The look of pain on Patricia's face confirmed that she already suspected something, and João, though more reserved, showed genuine concern. Ricardo, as always, was my pillar. "It's not too late, Clara," he said, holding my hand. "Go to her. She needs you." I got Sophia's address from Ana Lucia. Her apartment was in a more distant neighborhood, a place I rarely visited. With each block my car covered, my heart beat faster. What would I say? How would she react? I had been cruel. I arrived at Sophia's building. The intercom rang several times without an answer. I decided to go up. The door to her apartment was ajar. A shiver ran down my spine. I knocked lightly. No one answered. I pushed the door open and entered, the smell of mold and abandonment hitting me. The apartment was dark, the curtains closed, piles of dirty dishes in the sink, and clothes scattered. It was the chaos of a suffering soul. I found Sophia huddled on the living room sofa, covered by an old blanket, her eyes swollen and her hair matted. She was thin, pale, a shadow of the vibrant sister I knew. Seeing me, her eyes widened, mixing surprise, pain, and suppressed anger. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper, almost unrecognizable. "Did you come to finish the job? To kick me out for good?" Her words hit me like knives, but I deserved them. I felt a lump in my throat, but forced myself to speak, my voice choked. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't know. I had no idea what you were going through." She laughed, a bitter, joyless laugh. "Of course you didn't know. You were too busy with your perfect Christmas, judging me and excluding me. As always." "I know," I said, feeling tears stream down my face. "I was selfish. I was proud. I let old grievances blind me. I shouldn't have excluded you. I should have been here for you, as a sister. Please, forgive me." Silence filled the room. Sophia looked at me, the anger in her eyes slowly giving way to deep exhaustion. I didn't expect immediate forgiveness, or a hug. I just wanted her to know I was there. "I lost everything, Clara," she finally said, and her voice broke. "My job, Marcos. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. I just wanted to disappear." In that moment, all my past grievances dissolved. Her pain was palpable, real, and I had abandoned her. I sat on the floor beside the sofa, without touching her, just being present. "You're not alone, Sophia," I said, my voice firm despite the tears. "I'm here. And the family is here. We're going to help you get through this." The days that followed were long and difficult. Sophia was fragile, distrustful. I didn't force her to talk, I just stayed present. I brought food, helped clean the apartment, listened in silence when she finally started to vent about her boyfriend's betrayal, the humiliation of losing her job, and the fear of having no future. Ricardo and the children also came to visit her, and even Lucia, with her usual calm, brought some warmth to the heavy atmosphere. Patricia was especially important, sitting with her aunt and talking for hours, without judgment. It wasn't an instant forgiveness, nor a miraculous cure. The relationship with Sophia didn't mend overnight. There were moments of relapse, of her anger, of my frustration. But, little by little, the bridge began to be rebuilt. I helped her organize her finances, look for a new job, seek psychological support. More importantly, I listened to her. I listened to her pains, her frustrations, her fears, without judgment. And, by listening to her, I began to understand that the free butterfly I criticized so much was, in fact, a woman who always struggled to find her place, and that her failures were often a reflection of her own insecurities and an incessant search for acceptance. Gradually, Sophia began to get back on her feet. She found a temporary job, a small step. Her smile, once faded, began to reappear, albeit timidly. Our relationship never returned to being like the inseparable sisters of childhood, but it transformed into something more mature, more honest. There was no longer illusory perfection, but there was acceptance and a love that had been tested and, somehow, strengthened by pain. I learned that forgiveness is not just an act of kindness to others, but a liberation for oneself. By opening myself to Sophia's pain, I freed myself from the weight of my own grievances. That year's Christmas, which began with a painful exclusion, ended up teaching me the true essence of family. It's not about perfection or the absence of conflict, but about the ability to reach out, to forgive, and to be present, even when life pushes us apart. And, above all, I learned that dignity is not in being right, but in having the courage to recognize one's own mistakes and to rebuild what was broken, one brick at a time.